I'm always happy to talk about it. So it was in, first of all, for those who don't know, I have been reporting on Russian atrocities in West and Central Africa since 2018. And I stumbled on this topic by accident, I would say. So, what happened? Three Russian journalists had traveled from Moscow to Bangui. Bangui is the capital of the Central African Republic in 2018. And on that trip, they were on a mission to investigate the Wagner Group, which had just begun to operate in the Central African Republic after they were invited by the president, Francine Achash Touadera, to help fight rebels and militia groups that were seeking to overthrow his government. So, unfortunately for these three Russian journalists, they were killed somewhere in Sibut. Sibut is a small town in the central part of the country. And many people accused the Russians, the Wagner Group, of being behind their killing simply because these journalists had first gone to the military base where the Wagner Group was operating at the time, and they tried to speak to the Wagner mercenaries, but they were not allowed to do so. So when this incident happened, my editor at the time, Christopher Dickey, reached out to me and asked if I could investigate exactly what these journalists were doing there and where they had been to and what they had come up with. So I worked alongside the Daily Beast Russian correspondent Anna Nemtsova. So while Anna was trying to understand how the journalists had traveled, from Russia, she tried to piece together their itinerary in Russia before going to the Central African Republic. I looked at what they did when they arrived, where they went to, who they spoke with, and what have you. So eventually we put together a very interesting piece that was one of the most read articles in the Daily Beast, on the Daily Beast website of 2018. While investigating for that story, I found a lot of things that I didn't know about. I found that the Russians were involved in more than one community. I found that they were going everywhere. So I had many questions I needed answers for. So that's how I began to look deeply into the operations of the Wagner Group. Also because I felt that I owed the slain journalist, something in return, at least to be able to continue from where they stopped. So I kept, looking into Wagner, but I had not really traveled into the country per se until I decided to do so in 2023. So the reason why I decided to travel was because Yevgeny Prigozhin, the founder of the Wagner Group, had been killed in an air crash. And many people were not sure of what will be of the Wagner Group after the death of Prigozhin. I had questions. The entire world had questions. But the best place to know a lot about the Wagner Group anywhere in the world is the Central African Republic. If you're looking into their operations, because they have a massive network of mercenaries in this country. So I decided for the first time to go into the country. So I got to Cameroon. And from Cameroon, I decided to travel by road to the Central African Republic. Now, the reason why I was traveling by road is because I had been told the previous year by my contacts in the group that I was warned by my contacts in the group that I should never fly to Bangui. If I fly to Bangui, they said I will be arrested. Because they know this because they had been told, these Wagner mercenaries, they had been warned or they had been ordered by their commanders, their superiors, that whenever I was seen in the country, whenever any Russian paramilitary saw me in the country, they should either get me arrested or killed. So I knew I couldn't fly to Bangui, so I had to go by road to the country. So I traveled from Douala. Douala is the second, the commercial capital of Cameroon, and then I got to Gura Bulai, which is the community on the border with the Central African Republic. So I was able to cross from there to Beloko. Beloko is a town in the Central African Republic, just on the border with Cameroon. So I went into my guest house, a very lousy guest house. I mean, it's a place very poor in many ways. You can't find a good hotel there. You can't even find internet connection in the country is still on 2G. So,
2G.
yeah. Got to my guest house, and then the following day, I got on a commercial motorcycle and I asked the rider to take me to the border with Cameroon because I wanted to speak with artisanal miners who were fleeing the violence in the western part of the country into Cameroon. And by violence, I mean the fact that the Russians have started to seize gold mines in the western part of the country. And when they seize gold mines, they either get some miners killed or they just chase them away. So I wanted to speak with some of these miners to know exactly what was going on. Unfortunately for me, once the motorcyclist took me to the border, I saw these miners already trying to move. So I had just come down the motorcycle and was reaching out for my camera and my phone when this Hilux, Toyota Hilux pickup pulled over. And once the car pulled over, a couple of Central African soldiers came down the vehicle, and one of them rushed me, held me to my waist, and started to drag me. And at this point, I was confused, and I started to scream and ask that he left me, but he wouldn't listen. And he started to drag me on the floor, taking me away from the border. And while he was doing so, I was on the ground. I looked up and I saw two Russian paramilitaries.
So
And
how did they know that? Do you think they knew that you were going to be there, or they just recognized you?
well, I don't think they recognized me as Philip Obaji, the journalist who reports on Russia. I
Yeah.
think they saw someone who looked a lot
Like a
different.
journalist.
Yeah, or who even looked different. Yeah, like a journalist one, but also looked different from the locals. I mean, I came as this clean cut. That's the mistake I made. I should never have traveled. Clean cut, a little lighter than the average Central African from that community, and I spoke with an accent that was very different from, an accent that the people spoke. So I think in many ways the way I appeared, gave me away. So they probably thought this is something foreign, someone who's either a spy or a journalist, but whatever he is, he's not someone who is here in our interest. So that's
Yeah.
what I think they thought. So eventually, they dragged me from there and then took me to a military outpost that is very close to the border. And then there was this shipping container, that's stationed in the outpost or at the outpost. And then they threw me into that container and then locked me in there. So at the time I got there, I had bruises all over me, already had a fractured ankle, a broken wrist, and I was there overnight. There was no electricity, there was no food. In any case, I would not have eaten even if I was offered food. So my saving grace was this. The motorcyclist who took me to the border saw what happened. And so the following morning, he ran to a friend of his who is a senior army officer in the Central African Armed Forces. And then he pleaded with this officer to intervene. So it was the officer who came to the outpost the following morning and then pleaded with the Central African soldiers to let me go.
Wow.
Fortunately for me, the Russians were not there when they because I bet you they will never have allowed, that to let me go. Yeah. So that's my experience. And that wasn't all. After they let me go, I returned to Cameroon, bought a new camera, and then I crossed back into the Central African Republic. And look, I had traveled too far, Nick, to just go
Okay,
home empty-handed.
fair enough.
From Nigeria to Cameroon, Cameroon to Central Africa. That's a long journey.
Yeah.
So while I was going to a place called Aba, which is one community where the Russians had invaded, unfortunately for us, myself and my driver, we were caught by the local rebels from the Union for Peace rebel group. So
I love that, the Union for Peace, and they're a rebel group. That's
yes, that's how they call themselves. So they held us for 8 hours. 8 hours were held in the bush. So the reason why they held us was because they weren't sure who we were, whether we worked for the government or, in fact, or the Russians. So I kept explaining to them, look, we're fighting the same cause. I'm here to expose the atrocities of the Russians, and you are here to fight against injustice, as you say. So, it was until a senior commander came and then listened to our story and was convinced that I was a journalist who was only out there to uncover the wrongdoings of the Russians. That was when they let us go. So for 8 hours, we were held in the bush by these rebels. Yeah, so it was not
And
an easy trip.
after that, did you go back home, or were you like, nah,
No, no, it was
I
just the
need
beginning.
another
So
bit
I
of
continued to travel. I
excitement?
continued to move, and in the end, I came up with one of the biggest stories I've ever done. A story that exposed the atrocities, a massacre in a town called Koki in the northwest of the Central African Republic. I also exposed how the Russians, had raped dozens of women in a campaign that targeted young women who were not only raped but were administered contraceptives. And also, an abortion campaign was also carried out by the Russians on these women. So a lot that we didn't know about was uncovered because I refused to give up on that trip. So yes, it was a very difficult experience, very tough, and I never knew that I had some level of mental toughness until that period. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, how did you deal with, like, coming back from something like that? Must have been
yeah.
quite traumatic. Like, how was it adjusting back into normal life, where we're like, nah, there's nothing normal anymore. This is my life now.
So because I have spent the last decade listening to stories about abuse, torture, and what have you, so I have begun to understand exactly what happens in conflict zones. So I started out as a journalist covering the Boko Haram insurgency in northeastern Nigeria. So I have listened to dozens, hundreds of stories of abuse, of torture, and what have you. So when I go on assignments in conflict areas, whether it's in the Sahel or whether it's in northern Nigeria, I tell myself in my head that it could go wrong. You could get arrested, you could be abducted, but if it happens, the fact that you've listened to some people who have been brave tell their stories of bravery and strength, take a leap from what you've listened to, and then stay strong. And so when the Russians did what they did in Beloko, I kept remembering the stories of the men and women I've listened to who, in the face of threat, of terror, they stayed defiant and they're strong enough and brave enough, to stay alive. So that was what helped me. And I think if I had never been to the Sahel or northeastern Nigeria and covered Al Qaeda and ISIS groups on what they did to people in those communities, I probably would have battled very strongly with mental health. Yeah, but I was prepared. It took me a decade to prepare for what happened.
Yeah, it's almost like you got, like how you get a vaccine. You got little shots of of war to
I mean,
prepare
you
you.
describe it very well, Jana. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
Um,
look, I have listened to very terrible stories. Terrible stories.
I've read some of the things
Yeah.
you've listened to,
So,
and it's horrific.
so that helped me a lot. Yeah.